Today, I'm going to be talking about keeping compliant and the relationship between access control and fire safety. The reason I think this is a very important and relevant topic is because of the links access control has to many other parts of the building, including fire doors. I work for a business called Consort. It's a family-owned and run business with locations across 4 continents. We started as an architectural hardware manufacturer and supplier, but also now moved into furniture fittings and access control products, including a fully online hotel locking system and project management system to manage this. We have particular passion in ensuring we offer fully certified durable products which meet and beat the industry standards. So today we're going to be talking about the importance of fire safety in buildings. There's been a huge amount of attention on this over the last 5 years, post Grenfell, with investigations and reports looking into construction and how we can improve as an industry. This has been a very positive on the whole, and awareness in this regard has improved greatly. The role of access control systems in enhancing fire safety measures, the role of access control hardware in relation to fire safety and compartmentalization is hugely important, given its use on fire doors and cabling running through many fire barriers. As one of the newest and fastest changing parts of the construction project, it needs to be given more thought than it sometimes does. Issues around training and compliance are key, and all stakeholders need to ensure this is taken into account. The importance of remaining compliant and the multiple regulations and codes of practice to consider, and how correct specification and reliable products can improve the fire safety across the industry. Fire safety in the built environment. Building regulations are paramount in maintaining safety throughout a building's life cycle. These regulations are decided by governmental bodies with support from industry panels to ensure that buildings are constructed and maintained in a safe and efficient manner. They provide a framework for ensuring safety and compliance and a level of assurance to occupants, developers, architects, and regulatory authorities that buildings meet the minimum requirement of safety standards. Critical components of building regulations, specifically on measures to prevent, detect, and mitigate the risk of fires, have been paramount. With modern examples of failure, there's been more emphasis on clearer standards and the documentation of regulations in action. Compartmentalization and its significance in fire safety is paramount. Fire doors, ceilings, and walls act as barriers, compartmentalizing fire and smoke to prevent its spread throughout a building. In the UK, this is covered by BSEN 1634 and BS 476 as a dual approach. This has recently been confirmed that this will continue to be the case moving forward as well. In North America, the equivalents are UL 10C. Sadly, in public buildings such as hotels, this is not possible. Occupants should be familiar with fire escape routes and procedures through regular drills and training sessions. Sadly, in some public buildings such as hotels, this is not possible, and as such, even more thought must go into these buildings and how we protect them. Connection between fire doors and access control. Integration, fire doors, hardware, and access control systems are integral. Access control systems can be integrated with fire doors by connecting electronic access control devices such as card readers, keypads, or biometric scanners to the door hardware. These can be installed to regulate entry and exit, ensuring that only authorized individuals have access to certain areas of the building. With this comes time-based access restrictions or user-specific access permissions. The system can also be linked to fire alarm systems, enabling automatic unlocking of fire doors in the event of a fire to facilitate safe evacuation. What risks are there integrating access control of fire doors? One of the biggest concerns with most electronic components is the event of power outage or malfunctioning of the device, which can prevent occupants from exiting the building quickly, especially if manual override mechanisms are not readily available or clearly marked. Fail-safe and overrides can be implemented in the event of power outages. Integration introduces additional points of vulnerability in the building security and fire safety systems. If there is a lack of proper encryption, authentication mechanisms, or safety protocols in the integrated systems, sensitive data can be compromised as well as being susceptible to cyber attacks. Failure to properly integrate access control systems with fire doors in compliance with relevant codes and standards can result in legal and liability issues. Inadequate documentation, testing, or maintenance of integrated systems can also impact insurance coverage and increase the risk of litigation in the event of a related incident. Being able to restrict access and access control to certain areas can reduce risk. With correct integration and procedures, it can facilitate the efficiency of evacuations during emergencies, i.e. with connection to fire alarms, it can release fire doors immediately. Along with this, it can also restrict access to specific doors in the case of a fire, monitoring and reporting capabilities that provide valuable insights into fire safety compliance and incident response. Administrators can track access events, door status, and generate reports on the system performance, ensuring that fire doors are functional. There are a lot of standards around different components we've been talking about: access control, door hardware, and fire doors themselves. All products that used in fire compartmentalization should be tested in Europe to EN 1634. As we said, in the UK, they can be tested at EN 1634 or 476. But then there are also escape routes that need to be taken into consideration, where you have EN 1125, which is for occupancy of over 50 people, and EN 179, which is for occupancy of less than 50 people. Requirements and test methods for electromechanical lock sets and striking plates, access control systems in buildings, which is BSEN 14846. Also electronic escape routes to EN 13637. Installation of systems should follow EN 60839 and NCP 109, and cabling components should follow EN 50575. As you'll see, this is before we also mention thinking about the DDA requirements for the Disability Discrimination Act, for accessibility guidance, and there are many other standards as well. So there is a lot to think about. The importance of correct specification. This might sound obvious, but there are so many components and people within the decision-making process of this. It's why I thought I would highlight it. We need to ensure compatibility, also likely to save huge amounts of time and money if done correctly first time. Third-party tests encourage and advocate use of items that have been certified via channels such as Certifier or UL tested. Please note, UL 294 tests the integrity and safety of items, but doesn't specifically fire rate the item. Testing for fire in North America is to UL 10C and Europe EN 1634-1, as we covered earlier. Regular maintenance is a must with electronic operating parts to ensure their continued reliability and effectiveness in supporting fire measures. If the correct inspection and maintenance procedures are not followed, lack of maintenance may also null and void any warranties. So this is a key. I'm doing two separate slides here, one for the importance of correct specification in new builds, and then we'll also move on to retrofit projects. There is a huge difference between the two different types of building, and certainly here in the UK, obviously with the amount of heritage projects that we actually have, retrofit projects are a major thing we have to take into account with access control. I have a list of 11 stakeholders which should be consulted in a new build project, and I'm sure on major projects there could be even more, but I'm just going to list these to give you an idea of how complex it can become. Architects, interior designers, project managers, contractors, cost consultants, interior fit out companies, security consultants, door manufacturers, door hardware manufacturers, MEP contractors, and the client themselves. This shows the importance of getting everyone together, as all have a role to play in getting the system fit for the end user's requirements. If all these people do not consult, the likelihood is the system will not work as optimally as hoped. Another point is around following the golden thread principle. Specifying access control and fire safety measures in new builds allows the adherence to the golden thread principle, ensuring that essential information about the building's design, construction, and maintenance is consistently documented and accessible throughout its life cycle. By specifying these measures from the original design phase, the golden thread is established early on, enabling seamless integration of access control and fire safety systems into the building's architectural plans. This approach fosters transparency, accountability, and traceability, enhancing overall safety and regulatory compliance. Specifying access control and fire safety systems from the outset of a new build enables compliance with the latest building regulations and standards. By staying ahead of regulatory requirements, designers and architects can proactively integrate state-of-the-art solutions that meet or exceed safety benchmarks. This not only ensures legal compliance, but also future-proofs the buildings against evolving regulatory landscapes. Specifying access control and fire safety solutions during the early stages of a new build offers a wider range of options for designers and architects to choose from. This is because the building can be built to allow for them up front. With ample time for research and procurement, stakeholders can select products and components that best suit the building's specific requirements, budget constraints, and design aesthetics. The importance of correct specifications during retrofit. This is potentially a much harder discussion to have. Luckily, with the evolving base of access control and along with wireless products, it is making this a lot easier nowadays than it once was. Unlike new builds, where specifications can be integrated from the outset, retrofits require attention to detail to ensure adherence of existing regulations and standards. Failure to properly specify retrofitted solutions can result in a non-compliance, potentially compromising safety and security. Retrofitting access control and fire safety systems in older buildings can be complex due to the existing structural limitations, outdated infrastructure, and varying building codes over time. Specification plays a critical role in navigating these complexities by ensuring that chosen systems seamlessly integrate with the building existing frameworks whilst meeting the current safety and security requirements. This involves a thorough assessment, strategic planning, and careful selection of compatible solutions. Unlike new builds, where stakeholders are typically involved at the early design stages, retrofits require coordination among diverse stakeholders who may not have been part of the original concept or construction process. Specification comes paramount in facilitating effective communication and collaboration among stakeholders, including building owners, facility managers, architects, engineers, and regulatory authorities. It's hugely important on retrofit projects to ensure original certification of doors, ironmongeries, walls, etc. are taken into account, and how introducing a new access control system will affect the evidence of the original scope. Addressing the pain points. Existing studies and research on access control systems often focus more broadly on security systems or electronic access control in general, rather than specifically on their integration effectiveness when applied to doors. Absence of empirical evidence or documented case studies makes it challenging for stakeholders, including architects, building owners, and security professionals, to make informed decisions about the design, installation, and maintenance of access control systems on doors. Insufficient training is a major issue. Complexity of fire door systems, as noted in the regulations tab, there are a lot of standards to be mindful of when working with fire escape or emergency doors. There is a huge risk of compromised fire safety if inadequate training leads to improper installation, such as incorrect fitting of door hardware, inadequate sealing, or improper alignment, which can compromise the resistance capabilities. Specialized training for mechanical or electrical installers that focus on fire door installation, best practices, regulatory requirements, and proper handling of fire-rated components, as this isn't something they've been trained for, but when handling access control products on fire doors, they should be aware of. In the retrofitting, integrating access control often requires integration of various building systems, such as HVAC, lighting, and security system. Retrofitting access control without considering the original scope may overlook the necessary integration points, leading to incomplete or ineffective system integration. Without proper consideration for original scope and additional modifications or upgrades that may be required to accommodate them, oversight of this in a new access control system can increase the project's cost, timelines, and resource utilization. There must be regulatory compliance with relevant building codes, fire safety regulations, and industry standards. Again, the importance of stakeholder involvement helps identify the numerous factors such as safety and security protocols when everyone is involved, from architects to electrical and security consultants. It ensures compliance with regulations as more knowledge is shared, improving quality assurance and optimizing the building's performance. A lack of evidence because access control systems are quite new to the market means that there is not as much availability of fire certification on them compared to, say, door hardware or fire doors themselves. This is an industry issue that I do know many stakeholders are working on, including fire door manufacturers, door core manufacturers, and hardware people, including ourselves. We have been spending a lot of money recently in upgrading our standards or in testing to ensure that's the case. We feel there's a real requirement for more more training across the industry, from architects to all the way down to the installers that are using them and fitting them. More risk on retrofit projects, more risk assessments, planning, and on-site checks to ensure clarity before proceeding. And again, we've discussed it, the importance of stakeholder involvement. All collaboration promotes better practices and better standards. So, key takeaways: acknowledging and recognizing the importance of fire safety in building design and maintenance, the challenges fire doors, access control, and may experience due to improper access control installation and integration. Being aware of different standards when integrating hardware and access control. Staying informed about building codes, fire safety standards, and regulations governing fire door installations. Importance of all stakeholder involvement and collaboration in projects. I've worked on many projects over the years, and I can honestly say the earlier and the more people involved, the more successful those projects are. We really do find that the issues occur when stakeholders are just discussed separately, and multiple manufacturers and suppliers end up supplying products where there's been a lack of communication down the line. So the more stakeholders involved and the more conversations happening earlier, the better, the more likely any project is to succeed. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope if you have any questions, please let me know.
I hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for delivering your presentation on fire safety within access control. And it's it's wider legislative context. Just to start, could you just clarify why you wanted to talk about this topic today?
Yeah, sure. So I've seen that, well, with access control being such a sort of modern, new, and changing part of the construction industry, I feel that there's a lack of information, a lack of understanding between different parties, and therefore, it really is important to sort of draw attention to the fact that it is so important that everybody understands the other people's role, because essentially access control is integrating with lots of other parts of the building that already has their own regulation, already has their own things, but they're maybe not paying attention to access control, and vice versa. Access control security people aren't paying attention to the importance of fire safety on fire doors and other things. So I just think it's a very relevant subject that a lot of people would appreciate hearing more about, and maybe also hearing how we can maybe improve the space.
Definitely. And I think, like you said, it's that collaboration that's key. And I know that to move on to the kind of the main subject that I wanted to ask some questions about, is that, when we first had a conversation about you speaking at our event today, we had a slightly different synopsis. But the legislation changes kind of changed the relevance of that session. And that was, of course, only over the course of a couple of weeks, which perfectly kind of sums up the market's response to the legislation landscape today and all the changes that are happening constantly. There's been a whole number of changes to regulations, as well as a lot of standards to comply with, a lot of which you went through in your presentation. And if we're getting a little bit confused, how can responsible persons, business owners, building managers, architects, fire safety engineers, all the different people that you said, all the different stakeholders involved in these decisions, how can they stay abreast of these, what kind of feel like constant changes?
I mean, it is really difficult, but I think you touched on it about collaboration. I think it's hugely important, each other helping each other as well as relying on each other. I mean, you've got to sort of, I think, building owners, that employ architects and specialists in their field, they need to be able to rely on that. And as equally, individuals like myself, for instance, in fire door and access control hardware, I keep up to date on the specifics of our industry through journals and through trade bodies that we're members of. And a lot of this information is made public. And this, I suppose, where it comes to more general, where architects and contractors have so many different parts to keep abreast of, this is where they've got to find a really reliable supply chain where they can reach out to and know they're getting the best information, best practice, and feel confident that the people are looking after everybody's best interests. And I think that's key. But it all depends on which part of the where you are in that model. I mean, for facilities maintenance people, I suppose they have to rely on their supply chain, which will be brought into refurb work. But it's all about just trying to keep up to date. And I suppose if you can also prove that you've done this to the best of your knowledge, and maybe certain things have not, have not come out yet, or you are not made aware of them because they're new regulations, I think there can be some sort of sympathy there if you've been keeping up to everything as much as possible and you've been consulting everybody. But it is really difficult. I think trade journals and collaboration are two of the most key areas really here.
Definitely. And it's not just the kind of regulation landscape that's constantly changing. We're in a technological era with new emerging technologies all the time. I mean, in your presentation you mentioned RFID and biometrics to access control solutions, and that integration with automatic fire doors and safe evacuation. With these types of integration and IoT devices coming in, obviously that poses a further risk to
Yeah.
the building itself, where that's cyber attacks, like you mentioned. But where would you advise a business start with mitigating some of these vulnerabilities?
Well, I mean, I do know at the moment there's multiple different trade bodies that are working on the legislation around this exact subject. So there are trade bodies and regulatory authorities are all looking at this at the moment and trying to find best practice, both here in the UK and then in wider in Europe and also North America. So this is something that is being looked at, and I know that also the major tech companies are also looking at trying to look at minimum standards, and they are speaking to each other about how they can collaborate to try and, I think, get a minimum level of standard around. There are, I suppose, as a supplier, you've got to make sure that you're testing your products as much as you possibly can. And I'm talking about for instance, in our case, the project management software that we've got to ensure that, that's as safe as it can be. But it is a really difficult subject. And I think it's something that, again, you have to work with other parts of the industry, and that includes technology people, to include security companies that actually try and hack your systems, to try and understand where your weaknesses are and improve them. There's been a lot of hacks over the last 2 or 3 years, with some huge companies being caught out by this. And that's where you have to just try and ensure you're doing as much as humanly possible. One consultant I spoke to who deals in cybersecurity risk specifically said, everything is hackable. Essentially, what you have to do is make sure that you have done the best of your ability to ensure that it's easier for some, there are easier people out there, and that therefore normally means that luckily they move on. So if you ensure that you're doing everything you possibly can, the likelihood is they will find weaker targets.
Definitely. And I think you're right, that it's a very interesting kind of landscape at the moment. We're bringing in new legislation that brings responsibility back onto the manufacturer as opposed to just the end user now. So that kind of that ethical by design kind of sentiment is coming into play a lot more than it otherwise previously has. And that's just down to new technologies. We live with these technologies now, so we've got to find the right certifications and standards to integrate them properly. And just moving on slightly, you spoke about the importance of correct specification and the amount of people that are involved in the decision-making process. So I'm interested to know, how can organizations ensure decision makers are competent to make these decisions, when there are so many people, opinions, stakeholders, voices, all with a seat at the table?
Well, I mean, there are exams and certifications that you can do, and there is also update. I mean, I know that within our industry, but also take architects and designers, they can also do CPDs under sort of RIBA approved CPDs that keep your knowledge up to date. So there are lots of ways to prove competency. I still think in this area there is some way to go, but because it's so new, I think you have to, that's not really a surprise. I mean, that's why I'm doing this talk. And it's about many companies working together, and to be within our industry, I saw a meeting minutes the other day where there is a lot of collaboration between competitors to ensure that we think what moves forward is best for the market. So the good thing is, I think there's far more collaboration even between competitors to try and ensure best practice is met, and therefore that includes training, that includes certification schemes that can show people or companies are following best practice within those industries.
And you mentioned retrofitting specification being especially kind of complicated in this area because of building codes over time, among obviously other reasons that we highlighted. Could you just clarify some examples of what you mean by this? Is it a listed building, for example?
I mean, it can mean anything, but obviously the older the building, the longer the building's been around, the more complex it gets. So yeah, listed buildings. I mean, you think, especially in the UK, we've got buildings that are hundreds of years old. Now, things have changed drastically through that time, but yeah, I know that, you know, places like cathedrals still have access control. You know, how did we arrive at the decision-making process that put those on the doors, and where did the wiring go? You know, etc. So these are all thoughts that have to be, you know, in particular, with heritage projects, because you've also got the listed side of it, which protects them in that case. So there's a lot of thought process, but even as, you know, even if you take into account a 30-year-old apartment building or a 30-year-old office block that wants to install, they've still got fire doors now that will have been fire tested and should stick to certain regulations, that they, or certain compliance of when they were built. Therefore, how is this access control going to affect that? I mean, one of the great things, and this is really, you know, much new, access control has been around a while, but, you know, the battery operated wireless access control that's now becoming available means that there's potentially way less risk than there once was. You know, if you don't need wires, that's reducing the amount of work to implement an access control system medium term. But yeah, getting back to your point, listed buildings in particular, old buildings, but it can even be just 20, 30-year-old buildings that are either being revamped or upgraded to meet modern standards.
Definitely, and I think you're right. As we kind of have this new emerging technology that we've already kind of highlighted, you know, that landscape should hopefully start to change, and we should start seeing some kind of similarities more so between retrofitted and new builds, for example, the same sort of systems going in both, or so to speak. And just lastly, to finish off here, where do you see the fire safety or access control industry kind of changing the next couple of years? Obviously, we've had a whole lot of changes already, and I'm sure we have a whole lot more to come. But yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Well, I'm hoping firstly a lot more collaboration will allow for a whole better environment. I think certainly on the technology side, there's going to be a lot more standards introduced about cybersecurity and safety, ensuring that data is protected and ensuring, you know, security of those systems is meeting minimum levels of standards. Obviously, we've just gone through a review from the fire side of it, and they've decided to continue as a dual system. So I mean, I don't think there'll be huge changes in the actual way things should be fire tested, but I think maybe just ensuring that more of these products are being fire tested and more of these products are ensuring compliance with the fire doors and the hardware they're being used with. I think that's more just ensuring that actually maybe the compliance is there, because I don't think it quite is yet. I think any new standards are going to much more likely come on the technology side.
Definitely. And I think we're waiting for some standards to kind of be amended anyway in terms of the technology side as well. So we should start seeing that come to fruition, hopefully, you know, the remainder of this year, if not next. But Daniel, thank you so much for giving us your insight today. I really appreciate it. And if anybody has any further questions, they can reach out directly to Daniel on the platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye bye.